On the last day of its current session, the U.S. top court has upheld the state's ban on transgender women athletes in women's sports. The court's decision on birthright citizenship is still awaited. The Supreme Court, which, remember, has a 6-3 conservative majority in its bench, has basically allowed the states to ban trans athletes from girls' sports teams. The ruling coming after months of dramatic legal battles between the Trump administration, the conservative-leaning states, and trans athletes, along with their allies. The conversation has been just more than a legal process. It stirred a major culture debate in American society, further deepening the liberal versus conservative perspectives, basically. The Supreme Court's decision now puts a legal end to this discourse. On the first day of his second term, remember, U.S. President Donald Trump signed an executive order banning trans athletes from competing in women's sports. Donald Trump arguing that the practice is demeaning, unfair, and dangerous to women and girls. The executive order also adds that trans women competing in women's sports denies women and girls the equal opportunity to participate and excel in competitive sports. The second case, meanwhile, relates to ending automatic birthright citizenship. Under Trump's order, U.S.-born child can be denied U.S. passports if one of the parents is not a legal U.S. citizen. Lower federal courts, remember, have unanimously rejected Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship. But the crucial ruling from the Supreme Court's conservative-leaning bench is now awaited by millions across the country. Apart from these two cases, the U.S. Supreme Court, in fact, will also be deciding on a lawsuit by J.D. Vance. It seeks to loosen campaign finance limit that regulates the political spending and ensures a level playing field. If the court's decision goes in the GOP's favor, it would basically give political parties a more central role in the flow of political money around elections. The U.S. Supreme Court remains divided on ideological lines. This year itself, the court has delivered split decisions in 10 cases this year. And the way things stand, the ideological tilt favors conservative side by 6-3. For more on these developments, let's go straight across now to our correspondent, Susan Teherani, who's been tracking that very closely. Susan, a major development coming in regarding the Supreme Court upholding that transgender ban. Tell us more about the sentiment that is expected to really come up, because like we said, this is not just a legal process. It has been a major culture debate on ground in the United States. And of course, this will be a setback for LGBTQ rights.
To a certain extent, I think ideologically most Americans agree that, women fought so hard for their rights when it came to sports, and to have, someone who's biologically male come and compete when they're not physically in the same category has sort of rattled some feathers across America. Maybe not in New York or Los Angeles, but middle America, where a lot of girls rely on these sports to get scholarships, for example, to universities to go ahead and play pro. The conservatives had a sort of a more effective message in trying to translate that into how it would affect ordinary Americans. But nonetheless, there is that question right now that, biological aspects aside, how is this going to ultimately affect things culturally as well, moving towards a more traditional outlook when it comes to this issue. But I think most Americans are going to agree with the Supreme Court, at least on this particular issue. But I think the conversation is definitely going to continue, notably as we go into the midterm elections, where each lobby will try to convince its supporters that whether this was the right forward or whether America is, quote unquote, going backwards.
Right, and Susan, of course, we are also awaiting that judgment on birthright citizenship. But let's get our viewers a sense of what also happened on Monday in a major development that came in from the courts and what unfolded and came as a setback for President Donald Trump. The Supreme Court on Monday, remember, ruled that states can count ballots that arrive after Election Day. This was a 5-4 decision that basically rejected a Republican-led attack on laws in more than half the states and the District of Columbia that permit mailed ballots to arrive and be counted some number of days after the election, provided they are postmarked by Election Day. So basically, the U.S. Supreme Court backed state laws that allow mail-in ballots received after Election Day to be counted, rejecting a Republican-led challenge to a 5-day grace period in Mississippi. The justices overturned a lower court's decision, basically, that had deemed Mississippi's law inconsistent with U.S. statutes that set the timing of federal elections for the presidency, Senate, and House of Representatives. Remember, Donald Trump last year vowed to end the use of mail-in ballots nationwide before this November's midterm elections. States that allow mail ballots to be counted after Election Day have reacted with relief. Just to break this down further and what this really means ahead of the 2026 midterm polls, the outcome sparing officials the headache of changing their ballot rules just a few months before the midterm congressional elections. In just over half those states, the more forgiving deadlines basically apply only to ballots cast by military and overseas voters. How exactly has President Trump reacted? Well, he has slammed the Supreme Court's mail ballot ruling as detrimental to honest elections while praising a separate decision expanding his presidential authority to fire independent agency officials. Let's go back across now to our correspondent Susan Teherani. This, of course, is a setback for Donald Trump. He has also reacted quite sharply. Just lay out for our viewers what this really means coming crucially ahead of the midterm elections.
Yeah, the issue of mail-in ballots was really central to President Trump's campaign when he was running for a second term as U.S. president. He has argued time and again that mail-in ballots were one of the reasons he believed he thinks he won the 2020 election or that he lost the 2020 election. But that was during the COVID era, and to a certain extent, among some Republicans, it was justified. But now, with the SAVE Act is hanging in limbo in Congress, that would essentially redefine how voting takes place and how votes are counted, who can vote, and whatnot, and what credentials are needed. I think this really provides a backdrop of what's to come in Congress regarding the SAVE Act as well. Because remember, mail-in ballots have been ongoing for many years, as far as we can remember, but it did have an uptick again, as I mentioned, during the COVID era. And now some are arguing that, it's really not necessary, only under certain conditions. A lot of Americans agree with that. But then, again, this is something, not just this setback, but also the talking points for the Democrats. It's going to be something that might actually help them in the midterms.
All right, we're leaving it there for the moment, Susan. Thanks very much for that. And while we are tracking the latest coming in from the Supreme Court, another setback now for U.S. President Donald Trump. In the latest, the U.S. Supreme Court ruling against Trump's order limit birthright citizenship. Remember, this is a ruling that has been highly anticipated with far-reaching implications. So we are going to be closely monitoring the reactions that come in on that front as well. To stay up to speed with the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.